The crane fell first. 200 tons of rusted steel screaming sideways into the harbor, trailing fire, throwing sparks across the water like a dying sun. The sound hit Elena a half-second later, a concussion that rattled her teeth and turned the world white for one full breath. She pressed her eye back to the scope. Below her, 60 meters down the dry dock tower, the convoy was moving. 7 civilian trucks, Iranian defectors, engineers, wives, children, running for the U.S. extraction boats idling at Pier 4. 40 meters, 30, almost there. Then the first escort soldier dropped. Clean, single shot, no warning. The second dropped 4 seconds later, same precision, same silence. Not Iranian troops, not American, someone else. Elena swept the container maze. Cranes, steel walls, smoke, nothing. Then she saw it, a glint. Not sunlight, not fire reflection. A scope, watching her. The rival sniper already knew exactly where she was. The helicopter dropped them at 0342 and never slowed down. No hover, no landing. A 4-foot jump into darkness, onto a concrete pier that smelled of diesel and salt rot. And then the MH6 was gone, blades fading south, swallowed by the low clouds hanging over the Strait of Hormuz. Captain Elena Ward landed clean, absorbed the drop with bent knees, and was already moving before the sound died. 40 meters to the shipyard perimeter. She covered it in 20 seconds. Behind her, Sergeant First Class Darnell Okafor and 2 other operators from the 75th Ranger Element spread into a loose wedge, weapons up, scanning the dark. They didn't speak. Nobody needed to. Elena reached the fence line, corroded chain link, long since cut and recut by salvagers and smugglers, and slipped through a gap she could have walked through standing upright. On the other side, the shipyard opened up like the skeleton of something enormous and long dead. She stopped. She always stopped, the first time she saw a new killing ground. 30 seconds. No movement, just looking. The Bandar Abbas Industrial Shipyard, decommissioned on paper, contested in reality, stretched for nearly a kilometer along the Gulf coastline. To her left, a graveyard of cargo containers stacked 6 high, rusting in colors that used to be orange and blue and red, and were now all the same brown-gray of oxidized iron. To her right, 3 dry dock bays, each one large enough to swallow a destroyer. 2 of them held ships, one a half-constructed Iranian naval vessel, steel ribbing exposed like a carcass, and one a civilian bulk carrier that hadn't moved in what looked like years, waterline black with algae. The third dry dock was empty, its concrete walls sweating with humidity. Straight ahead, the crane forest. 7 cranes total, 4 still upright. 3 had fallen or been pushed over at various angles, their booms crossing like broken fingers against the sky. The tallest standing crane, she'd identified it from satellite imagery as Tower 7, rose 48 meters from the pier deck. Its cab was gone, just open steel lattice at the top, a platform of grating barely 3 meters square, overlooking the entire yard. That was her position. To the south, over the water, the sky was wrong. Not the normal pre-dawn dark, but a smeared amber orange that pulsed slowly, the color of a city on fire. 40 kilometers away, across the strait, the Israeli Air Force had struck the Iranian naval logistics base at Qeshm Island 31 hours ago. The secondary fires were still burning. Elena had watched the strike package go in from the C-17 that brought her theater, 100 red dots on a tactical display that translated in the real world to fuel depots and dry dock infrastructure and 3,000 lives rearranged in ways that couldn't be undone. The war wasn't coming. It had already started. She was just operating in the part of it that hadn't officially been named yet. Elena slung her Barrett MRAD across her back and began climbing. Tower 7's access ladder was on the eastern face, partially concealed by a sheet metal weather shield that had rusted away from its bolts and now clanged softly in the Gulf wind. She climbed without rushing, each rung tested before weight applied. 48 meters in 4 minutes. Tactical pace. At the top, she came out through a hatch in the grating and immediately went flat. She lay still for 90 seconds, letting her breathing slow, letting her eyes adjust to the new angle. From this height, the shipyard transformed. The container maze resolved into a grid. She could read the lanes between the stacks, identify choke points, trace the routes that a convoy of trucks would have to follow to reach Pier 4. The dry dock bays spread below her like a map. The seawater glittered orange in the reflected firelight from the south. She identified 12 sniper positions from her current location. She marked each one on her wrist-mounted display, assigned a priority threat level to each, and began the slow, methodical process of watching them in sequence. Okafor's voice crackled low in her earpiece. Alpha in position, Pier 4 clear, dock lights are dead, going to be dark down there. Copy, she said. Overwatch is set. I have eyes on the main approach lanes. Extraction window opens in 40. Convoy is 2 kilometers out, moving slow. Moving slow is fine, Elena said. Moving quiet is better. She settled in behind the rifle. The wind off the Gulf was 12 knots, gusting to 16 from the southwest. She felt it against her cheek and ran the calculation without thinking. Range to Pier 4, 180 meters. Range to the container maze entrance, 260. Range to the far dry dock wall, 410. The industrial environment was going to complicate every shot. Steel surfaces everywhere, heat rising from the warm concrete, the crane cables above her vibrating in the wind at frequencies that could generate false movement signals in her peripheral vision. Marcus had warned her about this. Shipyards eat snipers alive, he'd said. Everything moves, everything reflects. You'll see a threat in every shadow. She exhaled and let the scope settle. Below her, the shipyard waited. Quiet, patient. She didn't trust either. Marcus Hale came on the line at 0358. His voice was the same as it had always been. Low, unhurried, with the faint roughness of a man who'd spent too many cold nights in elevated positions, and not enough of them sleeping. Elena had trained under him for 2 years before his knees finally forced him out of fieldwork and into the advisor role he now occupied at FOB Tanner, 40 kilometers inland. She trusted his voice the way she trusted her own hands. "You're up," he said. It wasn't a question. "Tower 7, I have the full approach grid." "Good, tell me what you see." This was how Marcus operated. He didn't brief, he interrogated. He wanted her to articulate the environment, because articulation forced precision, and precision was the only thing that kept you alive when everything went sideways. "Main approach from the north gate is clean," she said. 3 lanes between the container stacks, each wide enough for 2 vehicles. Lane 2 has a choke point at the midpoint, a collapsed container blocking the right side, narrows to 1 vehicle width. The convoy will have to slow there. "That's your first problem." "I know. I've already flagged it. Any shooter with eyes on lane 2 can take their time at that choke point." "How many positions cover it?" 3 viable ones. Rooftop of the maintenance shed at bearing 040. The cab frame of crane 3, that's one of the fallen ones, boom angled at about 30 degrees. And a gap in the container stack at the north end, 3rd level, where 2 boxes have shifted enough to create a firing slit. "What's your confidence on each?" "Shed rooftop is exposed from my position. I can see it clean. Crane 3 cab is partially blocked by the number 5 tower support beam. The container slit is dark, but I can cover the approach angle if anyone shoots from there." "You're describing the positions you can handle," Marcus said. "What about the ones you can't?" Elena paused. She made herself look again. Slow sweep, east to west. She was looking for the places she'd unconsciously dismissed. The positions that didn't fit the standard template, the angles that required something unusual. The inner dry dock walls, she said after a moment. Go on. If someone is inside dry dock 2, the one with the unfinished hull, they'd have elevation on the pier approach through the gap between the hull and the dock wall. I can't cover that angle from here. It's a dead zone. Write it down, Marcus said. The positions you can't cover are the ones that kill you. She wrote it on her wrist display. Dead zone, dry dock 2 gap, bearing 175. Now, Marcus said, wind. 12 knots southwest, gusting to 16. That's clean air over open water. What happens when that wind hits the container stacks? She thought about it. It channels. The lanes will accelerate it, probably 15 to 20 knots through the corridors. And the crane structures will generate turbulence eddies at lower levels, which means a shooter in the container maze is dealing with a different wind environment than you are on top of that tower. Significantly different. So if you see a shot that looks like it came from inside the maze and the trajectory doesn't match your current wind read, what does that tell you? That the shooter knows his environment. He's already calculated the corridor winds separately from the ambient wind. It tells you he's been there a while, Marcus said. It tells you he's patient, and it tells you he knows this yard. Elena processed that. A prepared shooter with prior knowledge of the environment. She filed it under threat categories and let it settle into the back of her mind, where it would inform her instincts without distracting her focus. One more thing, Marcus said. Steel structures generate reflection angles that don't exist in any other environment. A shot can deflect off crane metal, off container walls, off the dry dock surface, and still carry enough energy to be lethal at 200 meters. I've seen it happen. If you hear a shot and the sound signature doesn't match a direct line, don't assume you've misidentified the source. The shot may genuinely have bounced. That sounds like a nightmare to work in. It is, Marcus said, which is why you stay elevated. Up here, you're above most of the reflection geometry. Down in the maze, you're inside it. I'm not going in the maze. Not planning to is different from not having to, he said. Remember that. The line went quiet for a moment. Then, convoy is 90 seconds out. Get your eyes on the north gate. Elena pressed her eye to the scope and found the gate. On it, she said. The convoy entered the shipyard at 0411. 7 trucks, as briefed. But Elena had been expecting a tight military formation. Vehicles close together, weapons visible, the disciplined movement of people who trained for this. What came through the north gate instead looked like something else entirely. The trucks were civilian, Iranian market pickup trucks and an older Toyota Land Cruiser, the kind of vehicles you'd see on any road in the Gulf region. No markings, no visible weapons except for the 2 Ranger element soldiers riding in the lead vehicle, rifles low and inside, trying to stay inconspicuous. Behind the lead truck, the other 6 vehicles moved with a hesitant, accordion pacing of drivers who were frightened and trying not to show it. Through the scope, Elena watched the faces in the vehicle windows. Men in their 30s and 40s, engineers she'd been told, specialists in Iranian naval propulsion and electronic systems. But also women in the passenger seats, headscarves pulled tight, staring forward with the rigid stillness of people who had committed to something irreversible. And children. She counted at least 4 visible children in the vehicles she could see, and the convoy blocked her view of the last 2 trucks entirely. Children. She'd known they were coming. The briefing had mentioned family units. But the briefing word families and the scope image of an 8-year-old boy pressed against a truck window, watching the dark shipyard slide past, were 2 entirely different things. Don't think about it, she told herself. Watch the approaches. She swept her scope back to the container maze. Clean. To the maintenance shed. Clean. To the Crane 3 cab. Clean. The convoy reached the Lane 2 choke point, the collapsed container that narrowed the passage to single vehicle width. The lead truck slowed. The one behind it slowed. For 11 seconds, the entire convoy was bunched, compressed, stopped in the worst possible position. Nothing happened. The lead truck eased through. One by one, the others followed. Elena exhaled and continued her sweep. It was at the far end of Lane 2, near the dry dock access road, that she saw the soldier. Iranian, uniform, lying on his back in the gap between a container and the dock wall. One arm extended, one knee bent at an angle that no living person would hold. She almost swept past him, another piece of the shipyard's debris, before her mind caught up to what her eyes had registered. She paused, centered the scope. The soldier had been dead for several hours at minimum. His position was relaxed in the way that only comes after rigor had passed. But that wasn't what held her attention. It was the entry wound. Small caliber, high velocity. She could see the dark stain on the left side of his torso, even from 200 meters, the way the fabric had been punched inward rather than torn. And the angle, she traced it backward from the wound orientation, the way the body had been thrown slightly to the right and forward. And she did the geometry. The shot had come from bearing approximately 340. She looked at bearing 340. There was nothing there. A dry dock wall, solid concrete, no elevated position, no window, no gap. She looked again. There was a crane cable running at approximately that bearing. One of the fallen cranes, boom angled across the yard, passing over the dry dock wall at about 15 meters of height. The cable ran from the boom tip to the mooring ring at ground level. Steel cable, 6 centimeters in diameter, continuous surface. A shot can deflect off crane metal, Marcus had said, still carry enough energy to be lethal. Elena felt something cold settle in her chest. Not fear, something more focused than fear. She keyed her radio. Okafor, dead Iranian soldier at grid mic 7. Old kill, not recent. Entry wound suggests shot from bearing 340, but there's no position at 340. I think it was a reflection shot. A pause. You're saying someone bounced around off the crane cable? Off the crane structure, yes, possible. She kept her scope on the dead soldier. It wasn't our people. It wasn't IRGC. They don't have shooters who work reflection geometry. Someone else was in this yard before we arrived. Could be old, Okafor said. Pre-op. Could be, Elena said, but she didn't believe it. The body wasn't old enough. She marked the position on her display and kept moving. She found the casing at 0429. She hadn't planned to go down from the tower. Marcus would have told her to stay elevated, and he would have been right. But the convoy had reached its intermediate holding position in the container bay, engines off, waiting for the extraction window. And she had 20 minutes before she needed to be back on the scope. The dead soldier's position was nagging at her in the specific way that unexplained things nagged at her. The way a weapon malfunction you couldn't replicate stayed in your mind until you pulled the mechanism apart and understood it. She came down the tower, moved through the shadows at the base of the container stacks, and reached the dead soldier's location in 6 minutes. He was IRGC. She confirmed that from the uniform insignia and the Khyber rifle slung across his back. No visible wounds except the entry. She didn't disturb the body beyond what was necessary to confirm his orientation. The casing was 4 meters away in a shallow puddle of rainwater that had collected in a depression in the concrete. She almost missed it because the water was dark with oil sheen, but the brass caught the distant fire glow from the south for just a moment, and she saw it. She picked it up in a gloved hand and held it in the beam of her red light torch. 7.62 by 54R. She turned it over. Standard rimmed case, full length, the dimensions of a Soviet-era cartridge that had been in continuous production since 1891 and was currently chambered in roughly a dozen military rifles used across the former Soviet bloc and its client states. Standard Dragunov SVD round. Half the world's armies ran it, but the primer crimp was wrong. She held it closer. The primer was crimped with a star pattern, not the circle crimp of standard production ammunition, but the 5-point star used specifically in suppressed weapon loading. Reduced powder charge, subsonic velocity, specifically engineered for use with an integral suppressor. That narrowed it considerably. SVDS, the suppressed variant of the Dragunov, built for special operations units. Russian in origin, used by Quds Force special units, yes, but not the standard IRGC infantry that patrolled a contested shipyard. This was a specialist weapon, a sniper's weapon, chosen specifically for work that required concealment of the shot's origin. She photographed the casing with her wrist camera and climbed back to the tower. Marcus answered on the first key. "I have a casing," she said, 7.62 by 54R, suppress load, SVDS configuration. Silence for 3 seconds. Then, "Not IRGC line infantry." "No, this is a trained shooter, possibly Quds Force special operations, but not standard IRGC." "Or not IRGC at all," Marcus said. His voice had changed, something quieter in it, more deliberate. "There are other users of that platform, former Soviet bloc contractors, certain intelligence services." "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking," he said carefully, "that someone who knew this convoy was coming was in that yard before we were, and they dealt with at least one Iranian patrol that might have interfered." A pause, "which could mean they're clearing the path, or establishing their own control of the ground before the extraction arrives," Elena said. "Yes, that too." Neither of them said what they were both thinking, that a prepared shooter with prior yard access, using suppressed specialist ammunition and reflection geometry, was not a problem that could be handled with a standard threat template. "Keep your eyes on the perimeter," Marcus said, "and watch for the same signature, reflection angles, suppressed shots, positions that don't make geometric sense." "What am I looking for specifically?" "You're looking for someone who knows this yard better than you do," Marcus said. "And that means you're already behind." She settled back behind the scope and began watching. The refinery went up at 0447. Not a gradual fire, not a secondary from the Qeshm strikes, a direct detonation. She heard the initial sharp crack of a shaped charge cutting a fuel line, then the half-second pause before the vapor cloud ignited, then the full-pressure explosion that turned the eastern sky orange and shook the crane tower hard enough that she grabbed the grating with one hand and held on. The fireball rose 200 meters. It lit the entire shipyard like noon. For 3 seconds, every surface in the yard was visible in perfect, merciless detail. In those 3 seconds, 2 things happened. The first, the convoy, which had been sitting quiet in the container bay, erupted into movement. Engines fired. Voices, frightened, tight, controlled, cut across the radio. Okafor's voice. "We're moving to Pier 4 early. Now, Overwatch, do you have the lane?" The second, she saw 2 soldiers drop. The lead truck had begun moving toward the pier access road. Its ranger escort, a specialist named Briggs she'd been briefly introduced to at the insertion point, was dismounted, rifle up, waving the trucks forward. He took the first round in the left shoulder and spun but stayed upright. He was still trying to wave the trucks forward when the second round hit him in the upper chest, and he went down hard. The second drop was a ranger in the rear vehicle, visible only for a moment as he stepped out to cover the convoy's tail. He fell without a sound, already gone when he hit the concrete. Both shots within 6 seconds. Both clean. Both suppressed. She heard nothing. No crack, no report, no sonic signature. Just the sudden mechanical wrongness of a human body ceasing to hold itself upright. Elena was already scanning, bearing from Briggs's position, working the wound angles. The first shot had been slightly right to left, which gave her an arc of potential origin. The second shot, on the ranger at the rear, that one had come from a different angle. Not a repositioned shooter, 2 separate positions, or a shooter exploiting a second reflection pathway. She swept the container stacks, the maintenance shed, the dry dock walls. Nothing. Overwatch, report! Okafor's voice, tight with control. 2 down. Briggs and Patterson, I think. Her voice was flat because it had to be. I have no position on the shooter. Suppressed fire, reflection geometry. Same signature as the dead IRGC. Same shooter? Unknown. Could be. She kept sweeping. Keep the convoy moving. Get them to Pier 4. I'll find him. If you can't find him, move the convoy, she said. Now. She heard the trucks accelerating below her. She forced herself to stop scanning reactively and start scanning analytically. The shooter was using reflections. That meant he needed a primary surface, a steel face large enough and flat enough to redirect a shot without destroying its accuracy. She looked for large, flat steel surfaces in the arc of both shots' potential origins. The dry dock hull, the unfinished destroyer in dry dock 2. The steel hull plating on its near side was a massive vertical surface, angled slightly inward as it curved toward the waterline. From the right position inside the dry dock, a shot could travel outward, hit the hull at a carefully calculated angle, deflect, and arrive at a target in the container bay with its trajectory completely masked. That was how it had been done. She couldn't see inside Dry Dock 2 from Tower 7. It was the dead zone she'd identified and written down and told herself she would have to manage. She was managing it now, and she had no answer. Marcus, she said, I think he's inside Dry Dock 2, using the unfinished hull as a deflection surface. A pause. Can you cover that position from Tower 7? No, complete dead zone. Then we have a problem, Marcus said. She stayed high. Every instinct was pushing her down, into the yard, into the maze, toward the source of the threat. But Marcus's voice was still in her head. Stay elevated. Down in the maze, you're inside the reflection geometry. Up here, you're above it. She forced herself to be patient, to watch. The convoy had reached Pier 4. She could hear the controlled chaos over the radio, truck doors opening, Okafor directing the defectors toward the extraction boats, someone crying, someone else speaking quiet Arabic she couldn't parse. The boats were there. They had time, if the shooter didn't move. She scanned systematically. Crane 3, the fallen one, boom angled across the yard. She studied the metal surface of the boom at its midpoint, where it would be most exposed to airflow. Still, no vibration, not caused by anything. She shifted to Crane 5, still standing, but listing, its counterweight arm on the wrong side, probably from the same ground shaking that had taken down the others. The main cable ran from the drum housing to a pulley at the boom tip, then down to the lifting hook swaying freely 6 meters off the ground. The cable was moving. She watched it. The cable moved in arcs, east-west arcs driven by the Gulf wind, regular and predictable. Then, for approximately 4 seconds, the arc broke. The cable moved slightly north-south, perpendicular to the wind. Then it returned to its east-west pattern. Something had transmitted a lateral vibration into the crane structure, something at ground level. A footstep on a connected surface. A person moving through the grillwork at the crane base. She marked the position. Crane 5 base bearing 095, approximately 310 meters from her position. She couldn't get a shot into the Dry Dock 2 interior from here, but Crane 5's base was in the open. If the shooter had moved from the dry dock to Crane 5, repositioning for another angle on the pier, she could take him. She waited. For 4 minutes, nothing. The cable returned to its regular oscillation. She was starting to doubt herself when the second sign came. Dust. A thin fall of rust-colored powder from a horizontal steel beam at the Crane 5 platform level, about 12 meters up. Not a large amount, not dramatic, just the fine particulate that falls when something organic, a hand, a shoulder, A boot presses against a rusted surface that has been undisturbed long enough to accumulate it. She had a position, 12 meters up the Crane 5 structure, on or near the platform level. A human being, static, watching. She held the crosshairs on the platform. 30 seconds, a minute, nothing visible. The shooter was in shadow, or behind a beam, or simply disciplined enough to not break the profile. She couldn't take a shot at a probable position, not with the convoy below and families in the vehicle lane. But she knew where he was. She keyed Marcus. I have a probable position, Crane 5 platform 095, 310 meters. Can you take it? Not without confirmation. I'm not shooting a shadow. Then you wait, Marcus said. He doesn't know you found him. He might, Elena said. Because even as she said it, the rustfall stopped. The platform was still. And she had the sudden, completely irrational, but operationally grounded conviction that whoever was on that platform had realized, in the same moment she'd found him, that he'd been found. The game had changed. She kept the scope on the platform and didn't move. The intercept came through at 0519. Okafor had a signals intelligence operator attached to the element, a young sergeant named Chavez, who spent most of the operation with one earpiece in and a tablet pressed against her knee, monitoring IRGC frequencies. She'd been quiet for 2 hours. When she spoke, it was directly to Elena's command net. Overwatch, I have something you need to hear. Elena kept her scope on the Crane 5 platform. Go ahead. I've been monitoring a secondary frequency, not IRGC standard but close. It's encrypted, but I'm getting fragments. I have a probable identification on one of your defectors. The convoy was 90% loaded. 3 of the 7 trucks had disgorged their passengers onto the extraction boats. 4 remained. Which one? Elena asked. The 3rd truck. The older man traveling with his son, 2 teenage boys, a wife. Registered as a propulsion engineer with the Iranian Navy. But the SIGINT fragments I'm getting, Chavez paused. His name is showing up in connection with a project code I've never seen before. Daryabane Sefid. Elena didn't speak. I ran it through the database as soon as I saw it, Chavez said. It translates roughly as White Seahawk, and it's flagged, highest priority, multiple agencies. Apparently it's a missile guidance development program. What kind of missiles? Medium range. The integration specs, if I'm reading the fragments correctly, are for a guidance package that could be adapted to ballistic missiles with a range of up to 1,500 kilometers. That puts every U.S. base in the region in range. Every Israeli population center. Elena lowered the scope for the first time in an hour. She found the 3rd truck at Pier 4. Watched the man, 50s, slight build, eyeglasses, moving with the deliberate, careful steps of someone holding himself together through sheer will, take his wife's hand and guide her toward the boat ramp. He has it with him? She asked. Not physically. I think it's digital. The fragments suggest a data transfer module, something small, thumb drive probably, or an embedded chip in a document. The targeting architecture for Daryabane Sefid. Chavez's voice was carefully controlled. If that data reaches U.S. intelligence, we'll have complete insight into Iran's guidance systems. We could potentially spoof the targeting, render the program useless. And if it doesn't reach us? Elena asked. If someone else gets it? Silence. Marcus answered instead. He'd been listening. If IRGC hardliners recover it, they have a complete guidance package for a missile program that doesn't yet exist. They can accelerate the timeline by years. His voice was flat. And if a 3rd party gets it, someone who isn't interested in either side winning, they have the most valuable piece of intelligence in the current conflict. Elena looked back at the Crane 5 platform through the scope. Every side wants them, she said. Yes, Marcus said, which means every side is in this yard right now, and the only question is who moves first. She thought about the dead IRGC soldier, the SVDS casing, the careful, unhurried marksmanship that had cleared a patrol without anyone noticing. Whoever was on that crane platform, they'd known. They'd known before the convoy arrived what it was carrying and why it mattered. They'd been preparing this ground for them. The question was, why? The extraction boats were loading. The first boat, 3/4 full, was already idling away from the pier, heading toward the U.S. guided missile destroyer, holding 12 kilometers out in the strait. The operation was 90 seconds from complete, if nothing else went wrong. Elena put the scope back to her eye. The Crane 5 platform was empty. The shooter had moved. He announced himself with a miss. That was the first thing she understood about him. That the near miss at 0531 was not a mistake. A shooter with his precision did not miss by accident. He missed by intention, and the intention was information. Elena was moving laterally along the Tower 7 platform, repositioning after the Crane 5 sighting, when the round struck the crane lattice 8 inches from her left hand. The sound was wrong, not the snap of a passing bullet, not the crack of a suppressed report, but a complex metallic ring that arrived from multiple directions simultaneously, as if the round had traveled through the steel structure itself before arriving at its final point of impact. She dropped flat, pressed herself against the grating, rifle forward, scope up. Her heart was doing what hearts did. She let it. She kept her breathing controlled and moved the scope in a slow, deliberate arc. Nothing. No movement. No secondary sound. No dust. No rust fall. No cable vibration. She ran the geometry. The impact point was on the lattice's eastern face, approximately 10 centimeters below the top rail. The bullet had struck at a shallow angle, nearly parallel to the surface rather than perpendicular, which meant it had been deflected before arrival. The round had come in from somewhere oblique, hit an intermediate surface, and arrived at her position along a final vector that had nothing to do with its original trajectory. 2 reflections, maybe 3. She worked it backward. Final vector, roughly northwest. Intermediate surface, the hull of the bulk carrier in Dry Dock 1, whose upper deck was at an elevation of roughly 15 meters. Primary origin, somewhere east of the dry docks, inside the container graveyard, at a position she currently had no line on from Tower 7. She keyed Marcus. He just shot past me, deliberate near miss. 2 reflection geometry off the bulk carrier hull. What range was the primary position? Estimating 400 to 450 meters, inside the container maze, eastern sector. A pause. He shot through 2 surface deflections at 400 meters and put the round 8 inches from your hand. Yes. That's not standard IRGC training, Marcus said. That's not standard anything. I know. He's telling you something. I know that too, Elena said. He's telling me he can kill me whenever he wants, and he's choosing not to. She kept the scope moving, which means he wants me alive, for now. Or he wants you occupied, Marcus said, focused on him instead of on whatever else is happening. She pulled the scope off the maze and swept to Pier 4. The third truck, the man with the missile targeting codes, was still loading. He was on the ramp now, helping his wife with a bag that appeared to be heavier than luggage. His 2 teenage sons were ahead of him on the boat ramp. The first extraction boat had pushed off and was running dark toward the destroyer. The second boat was 3/4 loaded. 1 more boat, and it would be done. Convoy status, she called on the tactical net. Okafor's voice controlled but tight. 3rd boat loading now. 8 minutes to full extraction. 8 minutes. She needed to hold the yard for 8 minutes. She swept back to the container maze. The shooter had given her his approximate sector. She worked the eastern corridor methodically, container face to container face, gap to gap, shadow to shadow. There, 4th level container, eastern stack. A gap between 2 units where the locking pin had failed, and the boxes had shifted slightly apart. The gap was roughly 20 centimeters wide, not visible from ground level, not visible from the pier, only from elevation at the right angle. She could see darkness inside it. She watched the darkness. For 3 minutes, she watched it. Her breathing had slowed to 1 cycle per 8 seconds. Her finger rested outside the trigger guard, as it always did until she was certain. The darkness moved. A micro shift. Not a person repositioning, but the kind of involuntary movement that happens when a held muscle finally releases. A shoulder dropping a fraction of an inch, a rib cage expanding on a long exhale. The kind of movement that disciplined snipers spend careers learning to eliminate and never fully do. She had him. She did not take the shot. She held the position. She memorized it. Container row 7, eastern stack, level 4, second gap from the north end. Bearing 082, range 420 meters. She had his position. She would use it when she needed to. Right now, what she needed was to understand why he wasn't using his. For the next 22 minutes, they tracked each other without moving. Elena understood, in the way she understood things that couldn't be fully articulated, that this was a different kind of engagement. Not a firefight, not even a duel in the conventional sense, 2 shooters trying to get a clean angle and take the other down. This was something more like a conversation in a language with no words, conducted at 400 meters through optics and the careful reading of a shared environment. She had his container position. He had her tower position. Neither could take the other cleanly. He was inside the container stack, protected by the steel geometry that also provided his deflection angles. She was on an elevated platform with the crane structure between her and his sector. They were functionally in a stalemate, so she read him instead. She cataloged everything the environment could tell her. The first thing she established was his pattern of movement. Every 8 minutes, exactly, the darkness in the container gap shifted. Not a large movement, a repositioning of weight, or a change in where he rested the rifle. But it was consistent. 8 minutes on, movement, then back to static. She timed it on her watch across 4 cycles, and each time the interval was within 15 seconds of 8 minutes. That was discipline. That was training. That was a man who had internalized a rest and scan cycle so completely that he executed it automatically, the way experienced drivers change lanes without thinking. It also told her something. His pattern was a habit, and habits were exploitable. The second thing was his thermal shadow. At 0543, a gap in the smoke from the distant refinery fire let a direct line of early morning sunlight rake across the eastern container face at a low angle. The light caught the steel surface for approximately 90 seconds before the smoke closed again. In those 90 seconds, she could see the faintest differential in thermal radiation from the container gap, the slightly cooler shape of a human body compared to the sun-warmed steel around it. He was lying prone, rifle extended through the gap, head slightly elevated, not resting, not relaxed, active position. He was watching something. She tracked the line of his estimated position and extended it forward. If he was watching something at that bearing and elevation, he was watching the pier, Pier 4, the extraction boats. He had been watching the convoy the entire time. The third thing she established was the rust displacement. At 0551, a sound reached her from below and to the east. Not a shot, not a human sound, but a soft, continuous scraping, like a boot dragging lightly across concrete. It lasted 4 seconds and stopped. She swept to the base of the eastern container stack and found the evidence. A thin trail of rust flakes on the concrete surface, leading from the stack base toward a drain channel in the dry dock access road. The flakes were disturbed sequentially, not dumped, not scattered by wind, but moved in a line that described something passing through. He had a ground-level partner, or he had come down from the container stack and moved, and she had missed the descent. She filed it without changing her assessment. One high-position shooter using the eastern stack. One unknown element at ground level, probably a spotter. She thought about the 8-minute interval. She ran it against what she knew about trained snipers and rest cycles. Most shooters worked on a 6 to 10-minute rotation when in extended static observation, long enough to prevent the visual fatigue that caused mismovement, short enough to stay alert to any change in the environment. 8 minutes was a very specific number. It suggested not just training, but a methodology that had been refined to a personal optimum. The kind of precision that came from years of self-knowledge and operational testing. This man had been doing this for a very long time. She thought about the thermal differential she'd observed, the prone position, extended, active. She had seen that body posture before in training. It was the posture of a shooter who was not merely watching, but reading. Not the relaxed observation of someone waiting for a specific target to appear, but the active, engaged observation of someone processing everything in their field of view simultaneously. An intelligence collection posture as much as a shooting posture. He was compiling a picture of the extraction, cataloging faces, identifying the principal package, tracking the data module. He would know exactly which truck the Mansouri family was in. He would have made the identification in the first 2 minutes of the convoy's arrival. She cross-referenced that against the rust displacement she'd found, the ground-level movement signature. If he had a spotter at ground level, that spotter could close the distance to the convoy without triggering her overwatch detection. She was watching elevation and mid-range, not the close-in ground. A chill moved through her that had nothing to do with the Gulf wind. The spotter could get close enough to the Mansouri family to make contact, could brush the engineer's bag in passing, could copy a data module in the time it took a frightened man to shepherd his family through a dark shipyard. She swept to the convoy, Pier 4, the loading. She watched the Mansouri family move through the chaos of a rapid extraction. Too many people, too little time, the particular vulnerability of a crowded ramp where attention was pointed outward at threats, and nobody was monitoring what was happening at arm's length. She could not stop it from here. She filed the probability and continued cataloging. The fourth thing she established took longer, and she almost missed it entirely. At 05:53, the distant refinery fire shifted, a section of burning infrastructure collapsing, the fire dropping in intensity for approximately 40 seconds before a secondary ignition renewed it. In that brief period, the ambient light in the shipyard changed. The orange-amber backlight that had been coming from the south dimmed, and for those 40 seconds the yard was lit more neutrally, the steel surfaces losing their warm cast. In that neutral light, she noticed the container gap at row 7, eastern stack, was fractionally brighter than it should be. She stared at it, tried to understand what she was seeing. The gap was lit from the inside, not from a torch, nothing that direct, but a faint, diffused illumination, the kind that could be produced by a screen, a tablet perhaps, or a dedicated targeting display of the kind used with advanced, long-range systems for environmental computation. He was running ballistic calculations, in real time, not just reading the yard by instinct, using a computerized system to model the deflection angles and confirm his shot solutions before he committed. That was what made the reflection geometry so reliable. It wasn't just training, it was technology. She thought about what that meant for the near miss. The round that had passed 8 inches from her hand had been computed. Every variable accounted for. The primary angle of departure, the 2 intermediate reflections, the energy loss at each surface, the wind in the container corridor versus the wind at her elevation. The calculation had placed that round within a hand's width of her face from 420 meters through 2 steel surfaces. That wasn't a warning, that was a demonstration. She filed it and kept watching. She thought about the 8-minute interval. She ran it against what she knew about trained snipers and rest cycles. That's consistent with what I'm thinking, Marcus said. He cleared the IRGC patrol that might have interfered with the convoy. He took a near-miss shot to tell me he's here without forcing a firefight. He's been covering the extraction, not threatening it. She paused. He wants the convoy out as much as we do. But not for the same reason, Marcus said. Maybe. She watched the container gap. The darkness was static. His 8-minute cycle was midway through. What are his options if his primary objective is the data module? The Daryabane Sefid package? Let the extraction proceed, Marcus said slowly. The package goes to U.S. intelligence. U.S. intelligence shares product with Israel through existing agreements. His faction, whoever they are, may have a channel to receive it from there. Or he's waiting to take it directly, Elena said. He lets us do the hard work of getting the convoy clear of the IRGC, and then at some point in the transit, he has another team downstream, Marcus said, on the water or at the collection point. We don't know that. No, we don't know that. She kept watching. At 0601, the second extraction boat pushed off. Elena saw the man, the engineer, the carrier of the Daryabane Sefid module, standing at the stern, watching the shipyard recede. His hand was in his coat pocket, pressed against something. One boat left. 12 people remaining on the pier. 8 minutes. She went back to the container gap. Empty. He had moved again, and this time she had missed it. The drone died at 0609. It wasn't a dramatic kill. No missile, no explosion. 1 second the MQ-9's telemetry was feeding position data to Chavez's tablet in green confidence bars. The next it was yellow degraded, and then red, and then gone. A single line of text. Link lost. Last position, 31.28 north, 56.74 east. Chavez's voice was carefully flat. We've lost Reaper support, signal corruption. I can't tell if it's jamming or a technical failure. Elena already knew it was jamming. The timing was not coincidental. What's the coverage gap? Okafor asked. Until the second asset comes on station from Al Dhafra, 41 minutes. 41 minutes without eyes in the sky. Without the Reaper's infrared capable of finding a person-sized heat source at 3 kilometers. Without its hellfire if a vehicle column tried to punch through the perimeter. As if on cue, Chavez's voice again. I have movement on the north approach, vehicle lights, multiple vehicles. I'm counting at least 4 sets of headlights. They're not using the main road. They're on the maintenance track, paralleling the fence line. Elena swept north. At the edge of her scope's range, she could see the lights. Dim, moving without urgency, spreading laterally as she watched. A flanking approach. Whoever it was had scouted the approach roads and chosen the one that kept them hidden from direct observation until they were almost at the perimeter fence. IRGC reinforcements. They'd taken their time, probably confirming the convoy's movement on the water before committing a ground element. Now the window was closing. How long until they reached the perimeter? Elena asked. 6 minutes, Chavez said. Maybe 7. The last extraction boat had 4 people on it. 8 more were still on the pier. 12 people, 6 minutes. 1 boat with a capacity of 20. Okafor, Elena said. Everyone on the boat. Right now. Whatever they're carrying, leave it. The families have... Leave it, she said. 6 minutes. She heard Okafor start moving people. She swept the north approach again and made her calculations. The maintenance track emerged onto the main yard access road at a point approximately 210 meters north of the pier. That intersection was her critical choke point. If the IRGC vehicles reached it before the last boat pushed off, they would have direct line of sight and vehicle-mounted fire onto the pier. She could cover that intersection from Tower 7. At 210 meters, with her MRAD zeroed at 300, the holdover was minimal. Wind was manageable. Light was bad. Pre-dawn ambient, refinery backlight to the south, but not impossible. She could take vehicles under fire at that range and force them to stop, buy time. She would be visible the instant she fired. The muzzle flash would give her position away completely. Every shooter in the yard, including the one in the container stack, would know exactly where she was. She was prepared for that. "Marcus," she said, "I'm going active. I'm going to engage the north approach vehicles if they reach the access road before the boat clears." A pause. "You'll blow your position." "I know." The other shooter, "I know," she said again. He didn't tell her not to. He understood, as she did, that there was no other option that preserved all the constraints simultaneously. "Then I need to tell you something," Marcus said, and his voice had changed. Something had come through, not on the tactical net, but on the separate command frequency he maintained with FOB Tanner. "I've been running a separate thread on the corporate angle. The oil infrastructure damaged in the Qeshm strikes. The company with the largest recovery contract already awarded is a Houston-based energy services firm. They filed the contract claim 6 hours before the strikes were officially confirmed." "They knew the strikes were coming," Elena said. "They had advance intelligence on the strike timeline, which means they have access to either U.S. or Israeli planning channels. And their interest in this region," he paused, "they would profit substantially from a continued conflict. A concluded peace deal or a defector-enabled intelligence breakthrough that allowed the U.S. to neutralize Iran's missile program would be bad for their contract portfolio." "You're saying someone with access to the extraction planning may have passed information to IRGC about the convoy?" "I'm saying it's possible," Marcus said. "I'm saying the timing of the drone jamming and the vehicle approach is very clean." She filed it. She would process it later. Right now, she had vehicles moving and a boat that hadn't pushed off yet. "How long?" she called to Okafor. 3 minutes. We're loading the last family." "You have 3 minutes," she said, "not 4. She moved to the eastern edge of the Tower 7 platform, where the crane lattice gave her a rest position facing north, and she put her crosshairs on the access road intersection, and she waited. The boy came out of nowhere. She saw him at 0613, 40 seconds after she'd established her firing position on the access road. He emerged from the gap between Container Row 9 and the dry dock wall. A child, maybe 8 or 9 years old, in a dark blue jacket and trousers that were too large for him, running with the low center of gravity scramble of a child who is terrified and trying not to be. He ran north, away from the pier, away from the boats. Wrong direction. She keyed the tactical net. "I have a child," male, approximately 8 years old, running north on Container Row 9, heading toward the access road. Okafor, strained. "That's the Mansouri boy. He broke from his mother during the load. We couldn't stop him. He's going toward the IRGC approach." "I know, can you—" "I'm covering the access road," she said. "If I leave this position—" She stopped herself. She looked at the access road. The vehicle lights were visible now, without magnification. 4 sets, maybe 5, moving at walking pace along the maintenance track. 2 minutes, maybe 100 seconds. She looked at the boy. He had reached the end of Container Row 9 and stopped, pressed against the last container, looking at the dark space in front of him. He could see the vehicle lights. He was smart enough to have stopped. But he was also in the open approach corridor, and when the IRGC vehicles came through, they would drive directly past him. She could not cover the access road and go after the boy. She could not leave the access road uncovered while the last boat was loading. She had been in positions of impossible choice before, in training, in simulation, twice in live operations, and each time the answer had been the same. You chose the option that preserved the mission, and you lived with the other thing for the rest of your life. She kept her crosshairs on the access road, and then movement to her left, ground level, moving fast from the direction of the container maze. A figure, moving low and quick through the shadows along the row 9 wall, heading toward the boy. Not an IRGC soldier, The movement pattern was wrong, too fluid, too deliberate, the movement of someone who knew exactly where they were going and had planned the route. The figure reached the boy, crouched, a hand on the boy's shoulder, not grabbing, not dragging, but pressing down, guiding, the gesture of someone experienced with frightened children. The boy looked up. The figure said something Elena couldn't hear. The boy followed. They moved back into the shadow of the container stack and disappeared. Elena kept her scope on the point where they'd vanished. The figure had been male, medium height, dark clothing. She hadn't seen a weapon, but the way he moved, the posture, the economy of motion, the deliberate route, was unmistakably the movement signature of a trained shooter. The watcher had just retrieved a lost child from a crossfire. She processed that. The vehicle lights were now at the junction of the maintenance track and the main access road, 80 meters from the intersection. 60. Okafor, she said. Status. 30 seconds, we're on the ramp. She settled her breathing. She put the crosshairs on the intersection and let the world narrow to that point. The lead IRGC vehicle, a Land Cruiser with a mounted PKM on the roll bar, reached the access road intersection at 06:15 and stopped. It stopped because someone shot out its right front tire. Elena had not fired. She had not changed her aim point, had not shifted her scope, had not altered her breathing. She was aimed at the intersection, and nothing had moved at the intersection except the vehicle, which had rolled to a stop. The shot had come from the container maze. She heard it, or rather she heard the secondary, the sound of the PKM gunner on the Land Cruiser reacting, throwing himself flat behind the roll bar, shouting in Farsi. The other vehicles in the column braked immediately, and for 7 seconds the entire IRGC approach froze as the column leader tried to assess whether they were in a kill zone. 7 seconds was enough. We're off. Okafor's voice, tight with something that might have been relief. Boat is pushing. We're clear of the pier. Elena exhaled. She kept the scope on the access road. The IRGC column was reorganizing. One vehicle pulling left to flank around the disabled Land Cruiser, another moving to recover the PKM position. They would be through the intersection in 90 seconds, but it didn't matter now. The boat was on the water. She keyed Marcus. Convoy is extracted. Boats are pushing. Copy, he said, but his voice was off. Something had come through on his end. What is it? A pause longer than she liked. FOB Tanner just received a flash from CENTCOM. The extraction package, the data module. Daryabane Sefid. She waited. Someone at the collection point on the destroyer reported an anomaly in the engineer's carry items. The module was there, but it had been accessed 32 minutes ago, approximately. She ran the timeline backward. 32 minutes ago, the engineer was still on the pier, before the second boat pushed off. Someone got to it, she said. The data was intact, copied, not removed. Someone duplicated it. On the pier? Or in the container maze, Marcus said. If someone had access to the engineer's person during the loading chaos. She thought about the boy, the watcher moving through the shadows with the child, the route that had taken them through the same sector where the engineer's family had been standing. The watcher copied the module, she said. Probably, Marcus said. Yes. So he has Daryabane Sefid. A copy of it. She pulled back from the scope. The IRGC vehicles were through the intersection now, spreading into the yard, but she barely registered it. She was thinking through the implications. A Quds Force dissident element, if that's what he was, with full access to Iran's missile guidance architecture. That data in the wrong hands was as dangerous as it was in the right ones, maybe more so. Marcus, she said, I need to know who he is, specifically. I'm working on it, Marcus said. But I need more time, and right now you need to worry about the 8 IRGC soldiers in your yard. He was right. She put the scope back up. The column had split. 2 vehicles moving toward the pier. Too late. Nothing there. Two vehicles moving into the container maze, one stationary, crew assessing the flat tire. She began tracking the two vehicles that had entered the maze. For the next 40 minutes, she didn't move. The IRGC element in the container maze moved slowly, cautiously. They were professionals who understood that they were in a sniper environment and had adjusted their tactics accordingly. Vehicles left behind, soldiers dismounted, moving in pairs with proper overwatch intervals. They were good. Under other circumstances, she would have respected the professionalism. She tracked them across her scope. They moved through lane 1, then turned south into lane 3. They were conducting a systematic clearance, looking for the convoy, which was gone, or looking for who had taken it. She did not engage. The convoy was extracted. Her mission objective was complete. Engaging the IRGC element now would serve nothing except her own instinct to punish them for the chaos they'd caused. And that instinct was not a valid operational consideration. What kept her on the platform, scope up, was the watcher. He was still in the yard. She was certain of it. The stillness in the container maze was different now. Not the alert stillness of a shooter on position, but the adaptive stillness of someone changing ground. She caught fragments of it every few minutes. A cable that moved in the wrong direction. A shadow that shifted when it shouldn't. The sound of a single boot placement on a surface she couldn't identify, arriving just at the edge of audibility and then gone. He was moving. Slowly, with purpose. Not toward the pier, that was behind him, empty. Not toward the IRGC element. He was avoiding them with the ease of a man who had planned for their arrival. He was moving toward Tower 7. She recognized it at 0641 when she caught a movement signature at the base of Crane 3, the fallen crane whose boom crossed the yard toward her tower at a height of 11 meters. The boom ran like a steel bridge from Crane 3's main body to a point approximately 12 meters from Tower 7's base. He could cross the boom, reach her tower, come up. She put the scope down and looked at the situation with her own eyes. IRGC element, in the container maze, 300 meters away, occupied with their clearance. The watcher, moving to her position. She had two options. She could descend the tower and move, abandon the elevated position, lose her overwatch advantage, enter the ground-level environment where his experience with the yard far exceeded hers. Or she could stay, let him come, and have a conversation at a range where neither of them could lie about intent. She stayed. And while she waited, something happened that she hadn't expected. The comms went dead. Not a gradual fade, a hard cut. One moment Marcus's breathing was in her earpiece, the next, nothing. She checked the radio, power on, frequency correct. She transmitted twice, no response. She checked her secondary, dead. Her tertiary, a personal satellite communicator, showed signal searching and did not find it. Full spectrum jamming. The IRGC element had deployed a jammer when they entered the yard. She was alone. For the first time in the operation, possibly for the first time in her professional career, she had no Marcus, no overwatch support, no tactical guidance, no voice telling her what the situation looked like from 2 levels up. She had her rifle, her optics, her training, and her own judgment. She had always known this moment would come eventually. Every shooter who relied on a mentor did. She found, to her own careful surprise, that she was ready for it. She had known it would come eventually. Every shooter who relied heavily on a mentor's guidance built a dependency that was, in its own way, a vulnerability. Not a professional weakness, but a cognitive one. The way a man who always checks the weather before deciding what to wear loses the instinct to simply look up and read the sky. Marcus had given her so much that she sometimes caught herself waiting for his analysis before committing to her own. This was the moment that ended. She thought about what Marcus had said about the watcher's behavior. He's telling you something. The first near miss had been information. The second, the shot that stopped the IRGC tire at the access road, had been action on her behalf. Everything in between had been observation, careful, unhurried, complete. He was not testing whether she could survive. He already knew she could survive. He'd seen her set position, read the yard, manage the convoy extraction under pressure. He was testing whether she would make the right call when the variables became genuinely ambiguous. She thought about that, about the specific kind of judgment that a field operator developed when they'd spent enough years in environments where the official rules of engagement had limited contact with the actual moral geometry of the situation. There was a reason veterans of long wars moved through the world with a particular weight. Not guilt exactly, but the accumulated mass of decisions made in conditions where every option cost something, where the best available choice was still a choice with consequences you'd carry. She thought about the boy, about the speed and certainty with which the watcher had moved to retrieve him. Not hesitating, not calculating the risk, just moving. Because a child in a crossfire was a problem you solved before any other problem. She thought about the Daryabane Sefid module, about what kind of person decided to copy intelligence data in the middle of an extraction, under fire, with precision and planning that required days of preparation. That wasn't opportunism, that was a mission, built and executed with the same deliberate professional logic she brought to her own work. Same training logic, different uniforms, different purposes, maybe. She put the scope back to the Crane 3 boom and watched the watcher begin his crossing. He moved across the boom with the unhurried confidence of a man who had done it before, possibly had done it specifically in preparation for this moment. He was approximately 6 feet tall, heavier than she'd estimated from his movement signature, dressed in dark clothing that wasn't quite military and wasn't quite civilian. He carried a rifle across his back. She could see the profile, the length, the suppressor on the muzzle, and he moved with it the way trained shooters move with rifles, as if the weight was not incidental, but integrated. He reached the midpoint of the boom. He stopped. He looked directly at her. Even at 12 meters distance in pre-dawn light, with both of them behind their respective optics, the moment had the quality of eye contact. He knew exactly where she was on the platform. She understood that he'd always known, and he was giving her the explicit choice. She kept her rifle on him. He raised one hand, open palm, the universal gesture. Then he pointed at the container maze, toward the IRGC element, and made a gesture she read as, "They're coming this way." She looked. Through the scope, she found the IRGC pair that had been moving through Lane 3. They had turned. They were moving toward Crane 5, which was approximately 40 meters from Tower 7's base. Standard clearance pattern. They would be at the tower in 4 minutes. She looked back at the watcher. He was already moving again, coming toward her. She made a decision that she knew Marcus would have spent 20 minutes arguing with her about, and that she had about 4 seconds to make. She let him come. He came up through the hatch in the grating at 0649. He did it with his hands visible, rifle slung, palms forward, the practiced body language of a professional announcing his intent before someone with a loaded weapon decided for him. He came up to one knee on the platform and stopped, and they looked at each other for a long moment. He was older than she'd expected, mid-40s, possibly 50, with a face that had been weathered by years in conditions she recognized. The same dryness around the eyes, the same compression of expression, the same stillness that accumulated in people who spent years watching the world through a scope and seeing things that couldn't be unseen. He had a beard, dark with gray beginning in it, and eyes that were the color of weathered concrete. He spoke in English, accented but clear. The accent was not what she'd expected. "Your extraction window closed 20 minutes ago," he said. "You're still here." "So are you," she said. "I have reasons." "So do I." The IRGC team below were 30 meters from the tower base. She could hear their boots on the concrete now, the low tactical communication between them. The watcher looked at her. Then he looked down at the IRGC pair. Then he looked at her again. Same problem, he said. Different uniforms. She didn't lower her rifle. He didn't reach for his. We have approximately 90 seconds, he said, to agree on how we handle the next 4 minutes. Talk, she said. He spoke quickly and without apparent concern for whether she believed him. My name is not important, he said. My affiliation is. I am Quds Force. Was Quds Force. I resigned that commission 14 months ago when I understood what the hardliners in Tehran intended to do with Daryabane Sefid. What they intend is not a deterrent. It is a first strike capability, specifically designed to neutralize U.S. carrier groups in the strait in the opening hours of an initiated conflict. She kept her rifle on him. You understand what is happening outside this yard? He continued. Not tonight, the larger picture. Tell me what you want me to know, she said. The Qeshm strike was the 4th Israeli action in 6 weeks, each one calibrated to be large enough to demonstrate capability and small enough to avoid crossing the threshold that triggers formal Iranian military response. The Iranians understand this. The hardliners in the Revolutionary Council have been waiting for a pretext, not just to respond but to escalate in a way that forces Tehran's moderates to either support a full military posture or be swept aside politically. He paused. Daryabane Sefid is the instrument of that escalation. The guidance package that Mansouri's team completed would give IRGC the capability to strike U.S. carrier battle groups at ranges beyond current defensive coverage. The moment that capability becomes operational, the political calculus inside Tehran changes permanently. The moderates have no argument left. The hardliners have a weapon they can actually use. She processed that. And if the program loses Mansouri's expertise, 2 years, perhaps 3, long enough for the current political moment to shift, long enough for the moderates to make the case that a diplomatic channel through back channels is more valuable than a first strike weapon that guarantees American retaliation. He held her eyes. This is why they are extracted, not just for the intelligence value of their debriefing, for the delay their absence creates. And the copy you made. The independent copy goes to an analytical team that your government will never acknowledge but cannot function without. They will use it to understand, but you survived this. He reached slowly into his jacket and produced a radio, not military spec, civilian encryption. IRGC frequency. I've been monitoring their command channel. Their orders tonight are to recover the defectors if possible, terminate if not. They know the extraction succeeded. They're now looking for intelligence on who facilitated it. He held the radio toward her. The patrol leader is going to report your tower position to their command in approximately 3 minutes. She took the radio. She pressed her back against the crane lattice, putting steel between herself and the ladder hatch. He moved to the opposite side of the platform, seamlessly, without instruction, covering the other angle as if they had rehearsed it. Which, she reflected, in some sense they had. 2 snipers, same training logic, different nations. The IRGC soldier came through the hatch. He came through facing east, the wrong direction, and he died without understanding that there were 2 people on the platform rather than 1, because the watcher had moved to his sector before Elena registered the threat. It was very quiet and very fast, and she would not tell me. Dry Dock 3, the empty one. There's a waterproof container cache in the inspection tunnel under the dock floor. It has the physical hardware for the Daryabane Sefid integration, the actual targeting processors, not data, hardware. If it reaches Tehran, the program continues with or without Dr. Mansouri. You want me to destroy it. I cannot do it from my position. The IRGC commander has 3 more vehicles outside the perimeter. If I fire a weapon inside this yard in the next 10 minutes, they come in force. He held her eyes. You have an exit. I don't. How do I know you're telling the truth? Because, he said, I had a clear shot at you from the container stack at range 420 meters, and I took it past your left hand instead." She studied him. He added, "And because the boy is in a safe position in the crane operator's shelter on the north side, he'll be found when this is over." She lowered her rifle. "The inspection tunnel entrance," she said. "Where?" "East wall of Dry Dock 3. A steel hatch, red paint, 3 meters from the waterline. You'll see the cable conduit running alongside it. White PVC runs along the wall." "Why not blow it yourself and run?" "Because if I fire inside this yard, the 3 vehicles outside come in, and this yard has 23 IRGC soldiers who don't know the extraction succeeded yet. You leave now, and they follow the extraction route. They don't seal the perimeter." He paused. "If I fire, they seal it. I don't get out, and I need to get out." "Why?" The soldier below was calling again, louder now. "Because I have a copy of Daryabane Sefid," he said simply, "and I have somewhere to be." She came down the tower the hard way, the east face, no ladder, hand over hand on the external framework. And she moved fast because she had perhaps 4 minutes before the soldier at the base circled the tower and found his partner missing and called it in. The watcher had gone west. She'd watched him cross the boom back toward the container maze before she began her descent, and she'd lost him in the shadows at the container base, and she understood she would not see him again until he chose it. Dry Dock 3 was 140 meters south, along the inner access road that paralleled the pier. She moved at a low run, staying close to the container stack wall, using the shadows. The shipyard had changed quality around her. Earlier, in the dark of the early morning, it had been still in the way of a held breath, tense with waiting. Now it was active. The IRGC vehicles outside the perimeter had their engines running. She could hear them, low and continuous through the steel fence. Inside the yard, 2 of the dismounted soldiers were in the container maze, too close. She could hear intermittent radio chatter from them, not close enough to track precisely, but within the same general quadrant. She was inside the geometry now, inside the echo and the reflection and the industrial complexity that Marcus had warned her about. Every surface around her was steel or concrete, and sound moved through it in ways that undermined her instincts. A radio transmission that seemed to come from her left turned out, when she paused and triangulated, to be coming from her right and bouncing off the dry dock wall behind her. She made herself slow down. The rule, Marcus's rule, ground into her across 2 years of training, was that speed in an unknown environment was the enemy of survival. You moved fast when you understood the ground. Until then, you moved deliberately. She reached the dry dock access road and moved along it at a controlled pace, checking each angle. Dry Dock 3 appeared on her left. The empty one, concrete walls descending 8 meters to the dock floor, a massive rectangular pit in the earth with the smell of salt water and rust. She looked down into it, empty as the satellite imagery had shown. The floor was wet, Gulf water seeping through the dock gates, and the walls were slick with algae and the mineral deposits left by decades of tide cycle. East wall, 3 meters from the waterline. She found the hatch. It was exactly as described. Red paint, the color mostly gone now, flaked to brown-gray rust around the edges, but a ghost of red still visible in the recesses of the hinge pins. Beside it, the white PVC conduit ran along the wall at shoulder height, disappearing through the concrete at both ends. The conduit had been installed after the dock was built, civilian spec, the kind of cable management you'd use to run communications wiring through an industrial facility. Recent installation, clean PVC in an environment where nothing else was clean. She opened the hatch. The inspection tunnel was narrow, wide enough for one person, 2 meters of ceiling clearance, extending into darkness. She clicked on her red light torch and moved in. 15 meters in, the tunnel branched. She took the branch toward the center of the dock floor. Another 10 meters. The container was there. Military spec, waterproof, approximately the size of a large suitcase, padlocked, stenciled in Farsi on the top panel, and underneath the Farsi text, in English, Navigational Instrumentation, Authorized Access Only. She had no time to examine the contents and no means to decrypt what she found there. She didn't need to. She had a shaped charge, a small one, a linear charge she carried for breach work, that she could place on the container's top panel. The energy would direct downward through the container and destroy the internal components without the kind of explosion that would bring every IRGC soldier in the yard down on her position. She placed it. She ran the wire to the corner of the tunnel branch and crouched behind the concrete angle. She thought, briefly, about the fact that she was doing this on the word of a man whose name she didn't know, whose faction she couldn't verify, in a tunnel under a foreign military installation, based on a judgment call she'd made at rifle point in the dark. She thought about what Marcus would say. The positions you can't cover are the ones that kill you. She thought about the data, about what happened if this hardware reached Tehran and the Daryabane Sefid program continued without Dr. Mansouri's expertise slowing it, about the missiles that would eventually be pointed at carrier groups and population centers in forward bases full of people her age and younger. She detonated the charge. The sound in the tunnel was concussive, far louder than a shaped charge should be in open air, the concrete walls multiplying and reflecting the pressure wave until she felt it in her chest, in her jaw, and the small bones of her inner ear. She stayed flat and counted to 3. Then she was up and moving, out of the tunnel, up the dock wall on the access ladder, back onto the yard surface. Smoke from the tunnel hatch, no fire. The charge had been directed, contained, but smoke. Every IRGC soldier in the yard now had a reference point. She ran. She was 60 meters from the pier access road when the choice presented itself, and it did so with a clarity that only came in situations where all the margins had been used up. She had the pier ahead of her, the water, the possibility of a swimming extraction. She had a beacon, and the destroyer was 12 kilometers out, and she could light the beacon and wait for IRGC to come get her, and that was a viable plan. She also had at the top of the container stack on her right, at an elevation of approximately 9 meters, a clear sight line to the IRGC command vehicle, the one that had stopped outside the perimeter fence and had been running its engine since the column arrived. Through a gap in the fence, she could see the command vehicle clearly, its antenna array, its crew of 2, one of whom was on a radio handset with what appeared to be focused urgency, coordinating the response to the tunnel explosion, directing the dismounted soldiers toward her position. If the command vehicle went down, the dismounted soldiers lost coordination. They would continue their search, but without the overhead picture the command vehicle was providing, they would be searching blind. She would have 6 to 8 minutes of confusion before they reorganized. 6 to 8 minutes was enough. She also saw, in the same peripheral sweep, the IRGC soldier who had been at the tower base. He had worked his way south along the container stack wall and was now 30 meters from her position, moving toward the tunnel smoke, not yet seeing her. She had 4 seconds of concealment left before he turned the corner. Option 1, run for the pier. Accept that the command vehicle stays operational. Accept the organized search. Trust the beacon and the RHIB and the 12 kilometers. Option 2, take the command vehicle through the fence gap. Go loud. Lose all remaining concealment. The dismounted soldiers will converge on her position. She will be in the open with hostile forces at multiple bearings. Option 3, she moved to the container stack, found the step weld points, the small welds used to tie the stacking pins, and climbed. 15 seconds to the top. She came up on the second level and looked. From this height, she could see the full layout. The IRGC dismounted element. 5 soldiers, 3 clustered at the tunnel hatch, 2 moving toward her original approach route. The command vehicle. Outside the fence, crew on radio. Beyond the fence, to the north, the other two IRGC vehicles, waiting for orders. And the watcher. She saw him on the far side of the container maze, moving parallel to her line toward the pier. He had not gone west the way she'd thought. He had circled, stayed inside the maze while she'd gone to the dry dock, and was now on a path that would reach the pier access road approximately 30 seconds after her. He was not running. He was moving the way she was, controlled, deliberate, preserving option. And he was watching the IRGC command vehicle through his own scope because she could see his rifle elevated in that direction as he moved. He had the same problem she had. She looked at the command vehicle, then at the watcher, then at the pier. The soldier who'd been moving toward her had stopped. He'd heard her climbing. He was scanning for the source. She had approximately 90 seconds. She weighed it all. The command vehicle disabled. 6 minutes of confusion. High probability of clean extraction for both her and the watcher. The command vehicle left operational. Organized search, poor odds for either of them, and the watcher, who carried a copy of intelligence that she now believed would do more good than harm, probably didn't make it to wherever he needed to go. She thought about Marcus, about what he would say to this specific calculation. Wars aren't fought in black and white anymore. She took the shot. The command vehicle's antenna array disintegrated. The radio handset in the operator's hand would now be transmitting static to nobody. The soldiers outside the perimeter would not receive the coordination signal they needed. The sound of the shot rolled through the shipyard, and she was already moving, down the container face, into the shadow at the base, toward the pier. Behind her, she heard the watcher's suppressed rifle fire once, then silence. She didn't look back. She hit the pier access road at a dead run and immediately slowed herself down. Running was how you died. Running stripped you of the attention you needed to process the environment, turned you into a linear target moving on a predictable route. Elena had learned it young and relearned it in every operation since. The instinct to run towards safety was almost always wrong. You moved fast when you understood the ground. You moved deliberately when you didn't. She didn't understand this ground anymore. The command vehicle shot had changed everything. She had gone loud. The muzzle flash from the top of the container stack would have been visible to every IRGC soldier in the yard. Not a precise location, but a sector, a bearing, enough for trained soldiers to work with. The dismounted element in the container maze would be redirecting now, moving to converge on the area between the eastern stacks and the dry dock access road. That was behind her. Ahead, the pier. 100 meters of open concrete between the end of the access road and the water's edge. No cover, nothing but the dark air and the distant fireglow from the south and the black water of the Gulf beyond. She stopped at the corner where the access road met the pier apron and pressed herself against the last container in the stack. She took 30 seconds she didn't feel she had and used them. Pier 4, clear. The extraction boats were gone. She could see the running lights of the last one, far out in the dark water, moving south toward the destroyer. The pier was empty concrete and the smell of diesel and Gulf salt, and the faint smoke that was still rising from the tunnel hatch behind her. She checked her gear. MRAD across her back, secured. Sidearm on her hip, full mag. The emergency beacon was in the left cargo pocket of her plate carrier, a compact unit, satellite-linked, that would transmit her GPS position to the destroyer's Combat Information Center the instant she activated it. Response time, 12 to 20 minutes, depending on sea state and RHIB availability. 12 to 20 minutes was a long time in this yard. She activated the beacon. The small device vibrated twice, confirmation of signal acquisition, and went still. Somewhere 12 kilometers out, a display in a darkened room would light up with her position. She was no longer invisible. She was also no longer alone. The radio was still dead. She tapped it twice, got nothing, left it. She heard the IRGC element reorganizing behind her. Not close, still in the container maze sector, but moving with more coordination than she'd expected from a unit that had just lost its command vehicle. They had a secondary communications capability, or a designated alternate commander had stepped up. Probably both. She gave them 4 minutes before the first pair emerged onto the pier access road. She needed to be off the pier in 4 minutes. In the water, or behind a new position, or both. She studied the pier layout again. At the base of the pier, where the access road met the concrete apron, there was a harbor master's station, a small prefabricated building, maybe 4 meters by 6, sitting on the pier's edge with a corrugated metal roof and windows that had been boarded up with plywood sometime in the last decade. Solid walls, elevated slightly, sitting on a concrete pad that raised it perhaps half a meter above the pier's surface. Not much, but cover, and a position she could hold while she waited for the RHIB. She moved to it in 15 seconds, low and fast, and took the north face, the side facing the water, away from the approach road. She set her back against the metal wall and brought the MRAD up, oriented toward the access road. The refinery fires to the south had found a new fuel source. The light was stronger now, amber and red, reflecting off the water in long columns that provided more illumination than she wanted. The pier was not as dark as it had been. She waited. The shipyard started coming apart at 7:18. She heard it before she saw it. A low structural groan from the eastern sector, the sound of stressed metal releasing, followed by the cascading percussion of a large object in motion. She looked east. The crane. Crane 5, the listing one, counterweight wrong, long compromised, had reached its tipping point. Whether the shaped charge detonation in the tunnel had transmitted enough ground vibration to finally destabilize it, or whether it had simply chosen this moment after years of slow decline, she couldn't know. What she could see was the main boom beginning its arc, rotating slowly at first and then accelerating, the massive steel arm sweeping east to west across the container yard in a descent that seemed to take forever and was over in 3 seconds. The boom struck the top of the eastern container stack at its midpoint. The impact was enormous. She felt it in the pier concrete through the soles of her boots. The top 2 containers in the stack sheared sideways and fell into the lane below. The boom continued its arc, dragging crane cables across the stack face, pulling the 3rd and 4th containers partially off their footings before the main structure finally came to rest in a chaos of twisted steel and displaced boxes. Dust and rust particles rose in a cloud that obscured the eastern sector completely. The IRGC element in that sector went silent. She used the dust cloud. While the visibility in the eastern maze was near zero, she moved. Not running, but covering ground fast. From the harbor master station north along the pier face, putting distance between herself and the access road approach. She found a second position at the pier's northern corner, where a mooring bollard and a stack of old dock fenders created a low barricade. She went flat behind it and reset. From this position, she could see the full length of Pier 4 and the access road junction. She could also see through the settling dust that the crane fall had not trapped the IRGC element. She could see movement in the container maze, soldiers working around the new debris field, reorienting. Slowed, but not stopped. The oil from the crane's hydraulic reservoir had spread across the container stack surfaces as the structure fell, and somewhere in that spread it had found an ignition source, the friction of moving steel, or an electrical fault in the crane's drive system. A fire started low and climbed fast up the hydraulic oil trail. Within 90 seconds of the crane fall, the eastern container stack was burning. The fire was not contained. It found the container that held the IRGC Elements vehicle, one of the trucks they'd parked inside the yard when they dismounted, pulling it into the container lane to conceal it from aerial observation. The truck's fuel tank went up in a secondary explosion that shook the pier, and the burning fuel spread across the concrete in a river that began moving south toward the dry dock access road. The yard was becoming uninhabitable. She checked her watch. 7 minutes since beacon activation. 5 to 13 minutes remaining on the RHIB response window. She swept the pier face one more time. Movement in the access road. The first IRGC pair had emerged from the maze and was moving toward the pier, single file, hugging the container wall. They were moving carefully. They had seen the crane fall, understood the fire, and were not rushing into an unknown situation. Professional. She had them at 230 meters. She could take them. The shot was clean from her position. Wind was manageable. Light from the fires behind them was more than enough. 2 rounds, 2 seconds, and the immediate threat was gone. She did not take it. 2 soldiers down was a provocation. 2 soldiers alive and confused were a delay. She needed delay, not provocation. She needed the remaining IRGC element to slow down, reassess, question their order of priority in a yard that was now on fire with a crane collapsed and their command vehicle dead. Dead soldiers produced escalation. Uncertain soldiers produced hesitation. She stayed flat behind the fender stack and let them come. At 150 meters, the lead soldier stopped. He was looking at the fires. He said something to his partner. She could see the movement of his head, couldn't hear the words. His partner responded. They stood there for 6 seconds, watching the burning container stack, watching the fuel fire river moving across the concrete. Then they pulled back to the access road, back toward the maze. She exhaled. The shipyard was burning itself into an argument for retreat, and the IRGC element was listening to it. She looked out at the water. The fires gave her enough light to see approximately a kilometer of surface. No RHIB, no running lights approaching. 8 minutes. 8 minutes 30. She waited. He came from the south. She almost fired. He emerged from the shadow at the base of the dry dock wall, moving low and fast, rifle slung, coming along the pier face toward her position. For one compressed second, she had him in her peripheral vision as an unidentified armed figure approaching her position from an unexpected direction, and her hands moved before her conscious mind caught up. She stopped herself with the crosshairs 8 inches from his center mass. The watcher. He moved to her position without asking permission and went flat beside her, and for a moment they were both pressed against the fender stack, looking south and east, shoulders nearly touching, and she understood that this was the operational reality. 2 people whose interests had converged enough to share a piece of pier for however long remained. She didn't lower her rifle immediately. She moved it to a neutral position, not aimed at him, not slung. Accessible. He noted it, said nothing. He was breathing hard, not the controlled breathing of someone who had been moving slowly. He had been running or climbing or both. There was a gash on his left forearm, recent, already clotting, the kind of tear that came from contact with a sharp metal edge at speed. He didn't look at it. IRGC has a third element, he said, low and flat, the way you spoke when volume was a threat. The 3 vehicles that were outside the perimeter. They came through the north gate when the crane fell, used the ground vibration to mask the breach. 8 soldiers, moving south through the container maze on the west side. She processed that. West side. She'd been watching east in center. The west approach was her blind sector from the fender stack position. How far out? 4 minutes, maybe 5. He looked at the water. Your extraction? RHIB, beacon is active. Estimated 9 to 18 minutes. From time of activation? Yes. What's your elapsed? 10 minutes. He did the math the same way she did. Tight. Yes. He reached into his jacket and produced a compact unit she recognized. Not military spec, a commercial satellite communicator modified with what appeared to be a custom encryption overlay. He thumbed it once and listened to something she couldn't hear through his earpiece. My exit is compromised, he said. He said it without visible emotion, the way you stated an operational fact that required adjustment rather than a disaster that required processing. My exfil route used the maintenance dock on the south perimeter. The fuel fire from your tunnel charge reached it. He paused fractionally. The dock is not usable. She looked at him. He looked back. I have a two-person RHIB, she said. Destroyer is 12 kilometers out. I know. You're not a U.S. service member. You're not a credentialed asset. If I bring you aboard a U.S. Navy vessel, you don't bring me aboard, he said. You bring me to within swimming distance of the ship, and I handle the rest. He held her eyes. I have a contact aboard. This was always a contingency. She studied him. She had been studying him since he'd come through the tower hatch, and she had not resolved him. He was not fully legible. There were layers she couldn't access, intentions she couldn't verify, a factional alignment that could be exactly what he described, or a more complex thing wearing that description as a coat. She was aware of this. She was also aware that she had run out of time to resolve it. She made the call. You follow my lead on the water, she said. You don't communicate with the RHIB crew unless I clear it. You're a recovered asset, unidentified, status pending. Acceptable, he said. To the west, she heard the IRGC element, boots on concrete, the careful, tactical movement of soldiers who knew they were in a sniper environment. 3 minutes. When it comes, she said, we go straight in. Don't stop on the pier. He nodded. They waited in the burning dark and did not speak. The firefight on the pier lasted 4 minutes and felt like 40. The IRGC West element emerged from the container maze at 0731. 8 soldiers, 4 pairs, moving in a sweep formation that was designed to cover the full pier width simultaneously. They came out of the maze entrance at the pier's north end and began moving south, toward the water, toward Elena's position. She had one advantage. They didn't know she was there. They were conducting a clearance sweep, not a targeted assault. They expected the yard to be empty. The convoy was gone. The explosion was old. The fires were burning without direction. They were professionals confirming an absence rather than hunters tracking a specific prey. She intended to keep it that way as long as possible. She keyed the beacon twice, the emergency signal that indicated active contact, and hoped whoever was monitoring at the Combat Information Center understood what it meant. The IRGC lead pair reached the 50-meter mark. She could see their faces now in the firelight. Both men scanning forward, rifles up, moving with the compressed caution of soldiers who'd heard the crane fall and didn't know why. The watcher touched her arm. A single light pressure. She looked at him. He indicated left, the water side of the pier. He was proposing they slide off the pier edge, into the water, before the IRGC element reached visual range. The water was 8 feet below the pier surface. A drop, a submersion, and then swimming in full kit in the Gulf while waiting for a boat that might not arrive for 7 more minutes. She ran the alternative. Stay behind the fenders, engage the IRGC element at close range, try to suppress all 8 while also moving. 8-2, in the open, on a lit pier. She looked at the water. She went over first. The drop was longer than 8 feet felt, long enough to think, briefly, that she'd misjudged the distance. And then the Gulf water hit her like a cold hand and took her under. She came up immediately, combat swimmer trained, keeping her head orientation, getting her rifle above the waterline on its sling. Her plate carrier weighed 43 pounds dry. In water it was an anchor, and she rode lower than she wanted. The watcher surfaced 2 feet to her left, a clean, controlled entry, already oriented. She looked up at the pier edge. The IRGC element was not at the edge. They were still sweeping south. She could see the bobbing of their weapon lights as they moved between the bollards, not yet at the section where she and the watcher had gone over. She pressed her back against the pier face, underwater from the chest down, and waited. The IRGC lead pair came to the edge 30 meters north of her position. One soldier shone a light over the edge, sweeping the water below. The light touched the surface 6 meters north of her, moved south, swept past without slowing. They moved on. She heard the sound she'd been waiting for. An engine. Low, fast, the specific sound of a rigid inflatable at planing speed, coming from the south. There, the watcher said quietly. She could see the RHIB's bow light, a white point in the dark, growing fast, covering the distance with the urgency of a crew that had received a contact report. She raised her arm. The RHIB altered course fractionally toward her. "Don't let them come to the pier," the watcher said. "I know." She raised her voice to exactly the volume that would carry to the RHIB without carrying to the pier above. "Short of the pier, keep off the wall." The RHIB slowed, a sailor at the bow. "Ward? Here, 2 personnel. Come alongside slow." They came alongside. She got a hand on the inflatable tube, passed her rifle up, took the offered hand, and came aboard in one movement. She turned immediately to help the watcher. He came aboard cleanly, without assistance, and immediately moved to the stern and put his back to the engine compartment and his face toward the pier. "Go," Elena said to the coxswain. The RHIB turned south and accelerated into the dark. Above them on the pier, she could hear the IRGC element responding to the engine sound. Shouting, a weapon firing, 2 rounds, 3, the sharp, flat crack of an AK variant, but the rounds were going wide, into the water astern, the sailors and the RHIB already outside of accurate fire range in the dark. Then they were out of range entirely, and there was only the engine and the water and the Gulf wind on her face, and the fires of the shipyard receding behind them. She looked back once. The shipyard was burning properly now, the eastern container stack fully involved, the crane wreckage glowing at its center, the dry dock fires reflecting off the water in long, orange columns. The refinery smoke to the south and the shipyard fires to the north together made the sky above the strait a permanent false dawn. She looked at the watcher. He was looking at the burning yard too. His expression was the expression of someone who had seen many things burn and had not become indifferent to it. "The boy," she said, "you said he was in the crane operator's shelter. North side of the yard, above the flood line." He looked at her. "The IRGC will find him when they clear the yard. They'll know he's a defector's child." He paused. "They won't harm him. A child alone in an empty yard. There's no operational reason. And IRGC soldiers have children." She sat with that. It wasn't reassurance. It was a probability assessment. Coming from him, it was the best available version of the truth. She faced forward. The destroyer was a wall of gray steel in the dark. The USS Porter, an Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer, riding the swell with the massive, patient indifference of a ship that displaced 9,000 tons, materialized from the dark at 1,200 meters and kept getting larger. She had been on destroyers before. They never looked this large from the water. The RHIB came alongside the accommodation ladder at 0749. The coxswain was professional and quiet. He'd seen the 2 of them come aboard without comment and had driven the 12 kilometers without asking questions, which was either excellent training or an acute reading of the situation. Elena climbed the accommodation ladder first. At the top, a lieutenant commander she didn't know, a corpsman, and 2 armed sailors who had positioned themselves with the specific restraint of people following orders about how to handle an unusual situation without looking like they were following orders about an unusual situation. Okafor was there too. He had made it aboard the second extraction boat and had been waiting for her. He looked at her, soaking wet, weaponed, returning from a yard that was currently visible on the destroyer's bridge cameras as a burning point on the horizon, and nodded once. The nod of a man who had run the probabilities on whether she'd make it and had not been certain. "Ward," he said. "Okafor," she said. Behind her, the watcher came up the accommodation ladder. He moved with the calm of someone who had planned for exactly this reception. He produced from inside his jacket a laminated identification card that he extended to the lieutenant commander. Elena didn't see what was on it. The lieutenant commander looked at it for 3 seconds. His expression did not change, which was itself an expression. "Sir," he said, "not a rank, a placeholder. If you'll follow Petty Officer Williams." The watcher followed Petty Officer Williams aft without looking back at Elena. She watched him go. Okafor appeared at her shoulder. "Who is that?" "Unknown," she said. "He came aboard with you." "He was in the water when I was in the water," she said. "The RHIB had room." Okafor looked at her with the specific look of a man who understood that this explanation was technically accurate and substantially incomplete. He chose not to pursue it, which was the right decision. The corpsman took her arm and she led him. Her left side was stiffening from the water and the weight of the gear, and she had a laceration on her right palm she hadn't registered until this moment, probably from the container climb, seeping slowly into the bandage he applied with practiced efficiency. "Dr. Mansouri," she said, "and his family." "Aboard," Okafor said. "All of them. Second boat beat the window by 11 minutes. A pause. His son, the younger one, wouldn't stop asking about the boy, the one who ran. She closed her eyes for a moment. "He was alive when I last had eyes on him." "I know," Okafor said. "I told them that." She nodded. The destroyer moved beneath her, riding a long swell, and she let herself feel the solidity of it, the weight and permanence of 9,000 tons of steel beneath her feet. She had been on precarious surfaces for 4 hours. This felt like the Earth. She looked south, toward the Strait of Hormuz, where the carrier battle group's formation lights were just visible on the horizon. Somewhere in the dark, the calculus of the U.S.-Israeli-Iranian confrontation was continuing. In CIC displays and satellite feeds and diplomatic back channels, and 1,000 other invisible processes. The Qeshm fires were still burning. The hardliners in Tehran were still there. The next strike package was probably already being planned. Tonight had done something. She believed that. Dr. Mansouri was alive and on his way to a debriefing that would cost Iran's missile program 2 years it couldn't afford. The Daryabane Sefid hardware was a pile of fused components in a tunnel under an uninhabitable shipyard. Whatever the watcher was going to do with his copy of the data module was beyond her operational authority to control, and she had made a judgment call about whether his intentions aligned well enough with her own to allow it. She would live with that judgment call for a long time. She went below to find dry clothes and the closest approximation of silence the destroyer could provide. She found him on the fantail at 0831. She hadn't gone looking. She had changed into dry utilities, eaten something without tasting it, and had been heading for the Combat Information Center to find out whether her radio could be patched through to Marcus. When she came through the watertight door onto the fantail and found the watcher standing at the stern rail, looking at the water. He didn't turn when she came through the door. He knew she was there. She went to the rail and stood 3 feet from him and looked at the same water. The shipyard was no longer visible. They were far enough out that the fires had merged into a single amber smear on the horizon, indistinguishable from the refinery and the general bruised glow of the conflict zone. The strait was dark, and the stars were clearer here, away from the worst of the smoke. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. "Your contact aboard," she said eventually. "The card you showed the lieutenant commander." "He knows me," the watcher said. "We have worked together before. This was arranged in advance." "You planned this contingency." "I plan most contingencies." He looked at her briefly, then back at the water. "The ones I miss are always the interesting ones." She thought about saying something about the data module, about asking him again directly where it was going and what would be done with it. She had the authority of being aboard a U.S. Navy vessel, and he had no immediate means of departure, and she could theoretically make this into an interrogation rather than a conversation. She decided not to. He had retrieved the Mansouri boy from a crossfire at personal risk. He had disrupted the IRGC approach at the access road at the precise moment it mattered. He had warned her about the West element when he could have used the information as leverage instead. He had walked through a burning yard to reach her position, rather than choosing the exit that would have protected his own interest. These were not the actions of someone whose intentions were catastrophically misaligned with her own. They were the actions of someone operating in the same general direction, by a different route, for reasons he'd partially explained and partially declined to explain. That was true of most people she worked with, if she was honest about it. The difference was that most of them wore the same uniform. She raised her rifle. She hadn't planned to. The motion was instinctive. She had the MRAD unslung and up before she fully understood why. And she was looking at him through the scope from 3 feet away, which was a range at which the scope was essentially useless, but the gesture was unambiguous. He turned slowly. He looked at the barrel, then he looked at her face. He did not reach for his rifle. His hands were at his sides. She kept the crosshairs on his chest for 3 seconds. 4. The Gulf wind moved between them. The destroyer engines hummed below the deck plates. The stars were very clear. She lowered the rifle. He exhaled. She wasn't sure if it was relief or simply the mechanical release of held breath. His face didn't change either way. "If the data goes somewhere it shouldn't," she said quietly, "I'll find out." "I know," he said. He seemed to mean it as a statement of fact rather than a challenge. "And if it does, then you'll have a reason to find me," he said. "And I will have given you one. And I don't intend to give you one." She looked at him. He looked back. She slung the rifle. "What's your actual name?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment, then, "Kaveh." She didn't ask for a last name. He didn't offer one. She went back inside. The after-action report was filed at 1400 the following day from a SCIF aboard USS Porter. She had written AARs before. She was skilled at them, in the specific way of someone who had learned early that the document that entered the record was the document that shaped everything that came after. The next mission assignment, the legal and political exposure, the version of events that became permanent. She was careful with language. She was precise with timelines. She was selective with facts. The official record described a successful extraction of 14 Iranian nationals with high-value intelligence relevance. It described an IRGC interdiction attempt that had been defeated through combined fires and tactical movement. It described the destruction of hardware associated with an identified Iranian weapons development program. It described the loss of 2 Rangers, Briggs and Patterson, both listed by name and service record, deaths listed as occurring in engagement with IRGC forces. It did not describe the watcher. It did not describe the data module, the copy, or the conversation on the tower platform in any detail beyond engagement with unidentified hostile forces in the yard perimeter, subsequently withdrawn. It did not describe the judgment call on the pier that had resulted in an unidentified foreign national being brought aboard a U.S. Navy vessel. These omissions were not accidents. They were decisions. She made them the way she made all decisions in this work, by considering the consequences of the alternatives and concluding that the documented version preserved more value than the complete version would have. She filed the report. She signed her name to it. She sat for a moment in the humming silence of the SCIF and looked at the filed document on the screen. She did not feel particularly good about it. She did not feel particularly bad about it either. She felt the way she always felt after these things, not vindicated and not compromised, but located somewhere in the large and poorly mapped territory between those 2 states. She closed the document and went to find coffee. Marcus called at 1617. The destroyer's communications officer had rigged a patch line, technically irregular, but the kind of irregular that senior chiefs had been enabling for the people who needed it for as long as there had been ships and sailors and reasons to need things. She took the call in a small compartment near the fantail that someone had apparently designated as an unofficial quiet space, judging by the coffee rings on the folding table and the hand-drawn sign on the door that said, "Humans only." Marcus's voice, when it came through, had the quality it got when he'd been awake too long, thinking about something that couldn't be resolved by thinking. "The corporate angle," he said, "the energy services company, CENTCOM has flagged it internally. There will be an investigation, a quiet one, the kind that takes 18 months and produces a classified annex that nobody reads." "So nothing," she said. "So nothing immediately visible," he said, "which is different from nothing, but I understand why it feels the same." She looked at her coffee. "The IRGC command vehicle, the antenna shot, that's going to show up in their damage assessment. They'll know a sniper was active in the yard after the extraction. They'll pull what they can from the surveillance cameras." "The cameras in that yard haven't been maintained in 4 years, Marcus said. "Whatever they pull will be degraded." "But not zero." "Not zero," he agreed. He was quiet for a moment. "You did what the mission required, more than what the mission required." "I made decisions that weren't in the mission plan." "You made decisions the mission plan didn't account for," he said. "That's different. The plan was written by people who didn't know what was in that yard." A pause. "I've been doing this for 31 years. The plans are always written by people who don't know what's in the yard." She heard the weight in it. Not comfort exactly, but the specific gravity of a man who had made his own off-plan decisions across 3 decades and had thought about them long enough to understand what they were. "The boy," she said. "The IRGC found him at 0900 local," Marcus said. "He was identified as a minor, unaccompanied, non-combatant. He's in ICRC custody as of 2 hours ago. His family is being notified through diplomatic back channels." He paused. "He's going to be fine, Elena." She absorbed that. "Get some sleep," Marcus said. "They're going to want to debrief you when the ship reaches Bahrain. Be rested. Be precise. I know how to be debriefed, Marcus." "I know you do. I say it anyway." A brief pause that had something human in it. Something that wasn't quite warmth and wasn't quite pride, but occupied the same general address. "You held the yard." "We held the yard," she said. He was quiet. She understood he was thinking about the we and what it included. "Wars aren't fought in black and white anymore," he said. "They haven't been for a long time. The difficult part isn't the killing. The difficult part is understanding who you're standing next to when the smoke clears." She thought about Kaveh on the fantail, the rifle raised, the rifle lowered, the 3 seconds in between. "What if you can't tell?" she asked. "Then you use your judgment," Marcus said, "and you live with it." The line went quiet. She heard him breathing for a moment, the specific sound of a man at a desk somewhere inland, in a building that was probably unremarkable from the outside, doing the work that never made any record. Then the line closed. She sat in the small compartment with the coffee rings on the table and let the destroyer move beneath her. The tablet was waiting when she returned to her bunk space at 1900. It was sitting on the folded blanket, screen dark, placed there by someone who had decided she'd had enough time, and it was past time to deal with the next thing. That was how it worked. That had always been how it worked. The operational cycle didn't pause for processing. It paused for sleep and coffee and the minimum of human maintenance that kept a person functional, and then it resumed. She sat on the bunk and picked up the tablet. A new mission brief. Assignment orders effective 48 hours from now. Location and mission parameters classified, summarized in the executive format that gave her enough to understand what kind of operation it was, and not enough to understand it fully until the formal brief in theater. She read the executive summary, then she put the tablet down without unlocking the full document. She went to the porthole, a small one, thick glass, scratched from years of salt and cleaning, and looked out at the Gulf. The strait was out there somewhere in the dark, the narrow strip of water through which 20% of the world's oil passed every day, the geographic accident that made this region perpetually contested. Beyond it, Iran. Beyond that, all the things that were happening and would continue to happen regardless of what she did or didn't do in one burning shipyard on one night. She thought about Kaveh, about wherever he was now, aboard this ship somewhere, or already gone, transferred by some process she hadn't been told about, to some destination she would probably never know. The data module was moving through channels she couldn't trace to a destination she couldn't verify, carrying intelligence that would shape a program she would never formally know about. She had made that choice with partial information and no authorization beyond her own judgment. She would find out eventually whether it had been right. Or she wouldn't, and the information would simply exist in the world without her ever knowing what it had become. That was the hardest thing about this work. Not the moments of decision. Those were fast, total, the full weight of attention on a single point. The hard part was afterward. The long afterward, when the decisions returned in pieces, in unexpected moments, in the dark hours of transits like this one, and you reassembled them and looked at them and asked yourself if you would do the same again. She didn't have an answer tonight. She picked up the tablet. She opened the full mission brief. Outside the porthole, the Strait of Hormuz was dark and moving, and entirely indifferent to what she decided. She read until the words stopped being words and became the shape of the next thing, the next yard, the next position, the next morning of bad light and wind and choices that the plan would not account for. She put the tablet down. She closed her eyes. Tomorrow she would know what came next.